While physicists and the latest technologies bring us more and more information about our universe, there is parallel investigation of the vast storehouses of material within our minds and how we use that information. One organization actively involved in this field is the Institute of General Semantics. And so, Food for Thought Productions is pleased to present two distinguished members of the Institute, recipients of the IGS prestigious J. Talmott Winchell Award for their contributions to the wider understanding of general semantics. The husband and wife team, Dr. Susan Presby Kodish and Dr. Bruce Kodish, whose latest book, Drive Yourself Sane, has just been published. Here they are with our producer, Lee Baker, to broaden our understanding of general semantics and how it can enhance our lives.
So nice to have you both here, and I want to congratulate you on your wonderful new book. I read it, I kept reading it from the time I started till the time at the end, because I was trying to figure out what Drive Yourself Sane referred to, and I figured it out. You know, you have to drive yourself to absorb all this material.
I see.
And
well, I hope you found it worth it.
Oh, it's fascinating. It's fabulous. I think, you know, it's something very useful. In fact, I was thinking it would be wonderful if some of these principles could be taught in grammar school.
I agree.
It would solve a lot of social problems if that could happen.
Yeah, even earlier.
Right.
Yeah.
And I want to congratulate you on the award you got. That was the Winchell Award that you got. So that was quite an honor.
Yes,
I'm impressed.
Thank you.
Well, we ought to start out with a definition, an explanation of just what general semantics is. Who wants to start? Susan, ladies
I can
first.
start. General semantics can be thought of as a practical philosophy and an applied psychology. It's a very broad field. Our emphasis is on both a world view that represents what we know about human beings in the world at this date, and practical techniques derived from that for helping people to evaluate better, function better, develop critical thinking skills, better relationships, communication, and so forth.
Right.
A lot of what we focus on is how human beings perceive and talk about the world that we live in. And a lot of the troubles that people can get into stem from, if you think of our perceptions and our language as a kind of a mapping process, then the perceptual and conceptual maps that we make, people can get stuck because they behave all too often as if the maps that they have for dealing with the situation are the way things are.
Yes.
My map is the way it is. The way I look at it, the way I talk about it, that's the way it is. That's all that there is to know about the situation.
Right, and they think that way or look at things that way about themselves too.
Yeah,
so they
that's
get
part of the world.
stuck in particular behavioral patterns
Well, they
and
also
habits.
form maps, I think, of other people without checking.
Right.
In other words, they have a map of someone else that
That's
they've
right.
devised.
And
And
if you-
what's the saying? Korzybski, the man who started this whole...
The map is not the territory.
The map is not the territory, which you
Yeah.
were saying that, and then when you were saying your perception, which is your map, tendency is to assume everybody sees it that way.
Yeah, and we get into endless troubles, all of us, I think, in one way or another.
I want to know how you use this in your work as a personal coach, and you want to explain what a personal coach does.
Well, personal coach is a form of helping people live their lives more fully, more effectively, and so forth. And it's rather on a continuum with psychotherapy. It focuses more on educational aspects and helping people to take the next step and steps in their lives.
To progress.
So, but there are also psychotherapies that are similar to that, like rational emotive behavior therapy. So I use a lot of the techniques in my work with people. two of the most important ways that I use it is something that we call dating, helping people to update their maps of the world, their maps of themselves,
be more current
in their perspective, so that they're not stuck, let's say, in old ways of behaving, that they can look at how they've changed, how the situations are different now, and so remove a block to moving forward. And another way is to help them uncover their assumptions, which lead to behaviors that can be functional. We all have assumptions, we can't avoid them, but sometimes they lead us into trouble. So we start from that. What are you assuming here?
We all have to use assumptions. I mean,
no
they are useful.
Yeah, I mean,
you can't
as human beings,
everything.
no, as human beings, we make assumptions.
Yes.
The question is, how useful are they?
So you're in physical therapy, is that right, Bruce?
Yeah.
How do you apply these principles to your work, or how does it apply? Because this is mostly what we've been talking about. It's on a mental level.
Yeah. Well, I've been practicing physical therapy for more than 20 years now, and general semantics can be applied in a number of different ways. One of them has to do with what you were saying just now when you asked the question. The general semantics relates to mental aspects, and I think there's an underlying assumption that some people have. It's sort of carried in the language that we use, that there's a physical realm and a mental realm. There's two, and because we have two separate words, there possibly can be a little bit of an undertow.
That's
yeah,
right.
that
Never
there
saw
are two separate
a mind
things.
without a body, or the other way around.
Yeah, and
except for cadavers.
It's helped me a great deal to remind myself to remember that when I'm working with an individual who's recovering from an automobile accident, who's injured their back, who may be recovering from a stroke, or whatever the kind of movement problem the person has, that I'm not just dealing with isolated joints and muscles, which can be a tendency, I think, that healthcare professionals can sort of box in what they're looking at.
Their specialty.
And not realize that I'm always working with an organism as a whole, a human being, in an environment. And the meanings that the person is making, the assumptions that the person has about their problem, and what are the possibilities of dealing with it, are going to make a tremendous difference in how they deal with and recover from the problem.
Physically.
Yeah. I remember one lady I worked with, she had been in an automobile accident and shattered her ankle. The way that the impact happened was that I think she was driving and her foot somehow pushed through the bottom part of the car there, and it was shattered basically and had to be reconstructed with orthopedic surgery and pins and so forth. And one of the first things that we had to deal with was with her idea that she might be getting punished because of this serious thing by God or, whatever force in the universe. And, without getting into theology at all with my patients, which I don't think is very constructive, basically I asked her, well, how do you know what God wants? And I pointed out to her that lots of people have to deal with all kinds of illnesses and problems, and they can be good people. So she had an assumption somewhere there that I had to help her deal with.
Beyond her.
That part of her assumption, I think, was that, if I have this serious problem, then I must be getting punished for it. And once we were able to, we talked about it a little bit.
So you had to dissipate that idea.
Yeah, once we got over that and said, there's no way that she knows, lots of good people have problems. Once we dealt with that assumption on the mental level, she was able to work much more effectively and getting better and being able to walk better. So the assumptions people make and the meanings people give to their problems can make all the difference in what happens.
Right, and there's so much, read someplace where the crankiest people are the ones who get well sooner. They just don't accept not being fully healthy, and they just
and that
do
works
whatever.
that works up to a point. If you're denying reality in another way where you say, well, there's nothing wrong with me, and don't seek help where you should, of course, that can be counterproductive.
Well, it's the same idea. It's it's the way you look at your physical condition.
Yeah, and part of
that
General
affects
Semantics
it.
involves not only how we explain things in the categories, but also, including non-verbally, very close observation of what's going on.
The other concept I wanted you to explain was the time binding. Do you want to?
Sure, I can start with that anyway. Time binding we use in a couple of different senses, but it fundamentally relates to our ability as humans, even if other animals, I think, do in some ways communicate and learn and so forth, but we seem to have the capacity to go beyond what other animals can. So we have laboratories, we have instruments like microscopes and telescopes and so forth, and libraries. And so we have the ability to bind time in the sense that we can learn from the past.
We can
and
access information.
Information from the past and contribute to the present and leave something for the future as a species and also as individuals.
So whatever situation we find ourselves in, or whatever culture, what we're doing, what we know, results from
what happened
before and what other people
and you inherit that when you come in.
Some of it you inherit, and some of it happens in your life experience.
Do you have anything in your pocket now? Like a pen
like
or
a Kleenex.
All right,
Okay,
that's a
Kleenex.
good example. What a wonderful invention.
Here's a Kleenex or a pen. I just pulled a pen out of my pocket, but people can do
Kleenex.
this at home. Pull something out of your pocket and find one thing that exists just purely on its own with no previous contribution from any other people from any time in the past. This fountain pen, somebody had to invent the idea of a pen.
Right. And writing.
And writing.
And writing. And so it goes back
on.
to thousands of years of history, actually, of writing.
So you're,
and then
you're a beneficiary.
We are all beneficiaries
A lot of things.
of people
so
who
therefore,
are long dead.
Yeah. So therefore, if you recognize that and realize you're a beneficiary of a whole series of contributions by lots of people, then you most likely feel, well, I've got to give back something. I've got to leave something. I
It's
have
a way,
to contribute.
it's a way of feeling connected to the rest of humanity in a very practical, down-to-earth way. You know, anything that I touch or anything that I see really is not here pretty much because of
Magic.
anything that
It's
I
not
did.
here because of
And it's
magic.
not here
Magic,
because of
that's right.
magic, because of the contributions of
The human
thousands and
beings.
millions of other human beings. And I can
Right.
feel, sense of gratitude for that.
Yeah.
It also implies a kind of ethic, which is that we behave in such a way that we contribute to other people's as well as our own ability to bind time productively.
And so anyway, so the time binding is how we have a connection from the past towards the future and so forth. So that's a linear connection people have. And then the horizontal
Across time, yes.
is what's going on right now.
Yeah, because we're
The things-
also, we live and we're dependent on
We're
all kinds of other
interdependent.
people.
Right.
Yeah, one of
Yeah.
the things that you mentioned, the seminar that we did this past weekend that I introduced on the first night and then we came back to it, is for people to consider what they want their legacy to be. And it was a novel question for many people, even people who had been involved with General Semantics for a long time, because we usually think of legacy in the sense of a bequest, that's a monetary.
A will.
A will. And my contention is, built on the notion of time binding, that we have a much broader legacy than that.
It's whatever we contribute
That's
as we
right.
go along.
That's right.
As a teacher, your legacy is what you impart to your
Your
students.
impact on your
And
students.
what they pass on, and who knows how far that goes.
And as a parent,
Yes.
how
the same.
you teach your children the kinds of citizens you raise, and so forth. Yes.
You don't have to be, or you don't have to write a book or become a multimedia superstar in order to have an influence on the world.
Right.
I mean, we all have
Exactly.
the potential to have an effect on, and we do have an effect on everyone around us.
All kinds of people.
And it can be in
Who we're
negative
interacting
ways. One of the things we talk about in the book is the ethics and the time-binding aspects of driving, especially driving on the freeway, so that people who are weaving in and out, not signaling, driving well above the speed limit,
Putting on the makeup.
it's negative time-binding, yes.
The people's,
Because they are putting out the potential for mayhem and death rather than productive.
some people don't seem to realize that driving constitutes a social act, that you're on the highway with other people
With
and
other
you're
people.
interacting with
That's
them.
right.
Even if you're sitting in the car
Yeah.
alone. Yeah,
That's right.
Exactly. You're
And
part
it's
of a
easy-
community.
I guess
That's
it's
right.
easy
The
to
freeway
forget.
community.
The freeway community. And I think perhaps if people actually consciously told themselves, well, here I am entering the freeway community,
Right.
it might make a difference.
And the other
You don't
thing is
know.
to recognize that my map of the situation around me on the freeway is not necessarily the way it is. That
I have to be
am
alert.
Almost undoubtedly, I'm not seeing and hearing and aware of everything.
So I better
and
keep on
that-
checking things out and looking
It
around
can make a
continually.
significant difference.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, what was the other question? Oh, I wanted to ask you about Albert Ellis's work, because his work is based on general semantics.
Yes, not exclusively, but largely. He started out as an analyst, a psychoanalyst, and found that it didn't seem effective. So he started developing what he thought was more effective. And he read extensively in general semantics. And in one of his, I guess his seminal professional book called Reason and Emotion in Psychotherapy, he talks about a lot of philosophers, but he specifically says that REBT, Rational Emotive Behavior Therapy, is largely a practical application of general semantics.
That was the impression that I had, because I was quite fascinated with the this concept of Ellis. You know, rational, emotive. When you put the rational ahead of the emotive,
And put them together, too.
and put
yeah.
them together, then you it works out much better than just using the emotional
Right. Well, I was talking before about
response.
this impact of our language, that when we talk about things with separate words, there can be a tendency to treat what we're referring to as if it involves some kind of isolated process that's not connected to anything else. So there's a mind, and there's a body, because we have two separate words. And as far as I know, as I said, there's no mind separate from a body. And the same kind of thing, I think, happens when we talk about reason and emotion, the intellect and feelings. And for us, we really see those, whatever those terms represent, they represent processes that in an intact individual anyhow, those processes of what we call reason and emotion always work together. I mean, if you go to, some people think of perhaps a conference of mathematicians as about the most rationalistic or reason-oriented group of people you could think of. But if you go to a convention of mathematicians, you will see people arguing very emotionally and violently
Yes.
with each other about the most abstract topics.
Right.
So
Opinions.
the emotion is not separate
Theories and
even
opinions.
from
You
that.
can't divorce yourself from
but the
that
impression
aspect.
the impression that I have of Ellis's ideas is that if you the rational is how you monitor the emotions, how you decide to handle the emotions, instead of just responding only emotionally to an event, to a situation.
That's part of it. He also has a very, what's now called a holistic approach, what we call organism as a whole and environment, that all of these things are inextricably connected and intertwined. In his experience, the beliefs, the B in his ABC model, the beliefs are the most readily accessible sometimes to identify and to change. So it's a point of entry. And when you work on what we're calling assumptions and other kinds of beliefs, what you say to yourself and so forth, you can influence in a circular way your emotions, how you behave, which feeds back into all of the above.
Mm-hmm. You worked with Ellis, didn't you?
Yes, I studied and worked with him and
right.
co-led a group with him, worked at
right.
the Institute for Emotive Therapy.
Right. What's the other thing? Oh, the other thing I was thinking about is when you talk about the map is not the territory, that also refers to language. Mm-hmm. In other words, the word is not the meaning. Mm-hmm. In other words, we use the word. What I mean by that word may not mean the same, have the same meaning.
That's right.
Isn't that a part of the general semantics approach in conversation, in dialoguing?
Yeah, in two ways. When we say the word is not the thing, which is a shorthand for saying that I call this a table, but that isn't, it isn't what I'm calling it on a nonverbal level. And also that when we use words in a certain sense, every time we use a word, it has a slightly different meaning because we are slightly different than we were before. The situation is slightly different. And we're speaking to somebody with a different nervous system, a different vocabulary, even with the same words.
Well, so in other words, the word will, for instance, if I'm using the word and speaking to either one of you, and I use the word, that would be based on the map of my interior
exactly.
Equipment.
Yes.
Exactly.
For example, the word apple seems so simple, and you might say to somebody, would you please go to the supermarket, or while you're there, pick up a bag of apples for me? And if you have a limited definition of apples, and let's say, I knew a young woman many, many years ago who had this. I mean, a regular apple was a delicious apple, and that was her notion of apples. So if
you mean the brand? The
yes,
brand.
Yeah, the kind of, the type, delicious apples, as opposed to Macintosh or Fuji or whatever. And so if you went to, if she asked you for apples and you went to the store and you came home with a bag of Macintosh or Fuji or whatever else,
because to me,
she would think,
Macintosh
what is this?
Delicious.
That's not an apple. Right. No, but I meant the
right. Yes.
Yeah, the type of apple delicious. Yes.
Yes.
So that's a very simple example, and yet even that can lead to fights.
That's always the case, I believe, and that's a legitimate use of the term always, that the meanings that people give to any particular word or statement, there's always going to be some slight difference based on the individual, because in a very real sense, the meaning is not in the word. The meaning is in the person.
Right.
The person is creating and allocating the meaning.
Allocating the meaning and often assuming the other person knows what I mean.
Exactly. I think we all tend to do that. By maintaining that awareness, it's possible to, when you get into difficulties with communications with somebody, to go back and not necessarily to ask them to define their terms, because people may decide to just go back to the dictionary and think that they've resolved the problem that way. But what do you mean? Because
also,
I think I understood.
The dictionaries don't have the same definitions either.
That's
No.
right.
You could take 5 different dictionaries and have 5 different definitions for the same word. So instead
Now,
of
dictionaries are history books.
Basically.
Yeah, they're based
how
on
words have been used by some people in some circles.
And they're very useful because, I mean, obviously we need to have some kind of shared response to the terms that we're using, otherwise we wouldn't be able to communicate at all. And
I mean,
the
if you said,
dictionaries can be useful.
be here at 3 o'clock, if we had totally different ideas about what 3 o'clock was, then
you'd be here in the
it would
middle
be
of the
very
night.
hit or miss. Who knows when we would
Well,
be here?
there may
but
be
we
times-
recognize that clocks are different and so forth and so on.
There may be times when that's actually a kind of a problem. You may say, 3 o'clock
But
to somebody.
didn't I tell you Didn't I tell you 3 o'clock Pacific time?
But you didn't say in the afternoon.
Yes. You know, I don't think
So you see,
I don't think you needed to, but I do a lot of my work on the phone, and I work with
was making
people.
a joke.
Yes,
there.
I know, but it has. See, the thing is, when you have awareness, you can joke about it, but it has real life implications. Because I work with people on the East Coast over the phone, and I have learned after a couple of misses that we need to be very specific. 3 o'clock my time.
Yes,
So that's 6 o'clock your time,
right.
etc.
Things like that.
So
Yeah.
there needs to be, obviously, you can have a discussion and then end up discussing the meanings of the words and how you define them for forever, and that's not useful. But at a certain point, you can decide that you've specified things
clarify.
enough that for the purposes of discussion and agreement, we can go on with the discussion.
Right, and if you
And
have an awareness
if it
of
works
this,
out.
when you start to be bumping your noses against each other in a discussion, then you can say, hey, wait a minute, maybe we're not talking about the same thing.
Maybe we're not communicating.
Not yes.
There's always that possibility, though, and
Yeah.
being aware of that
So
is
in other words,
is
if you
important.
feel like you're having a problem communicating, you start defining what you mean by what you say and so forth.
Yes, get more
so forth.
information.
Right.
Yeah.
We're running short of time, and I did want to ask you. I did want to ask you if can a person learn how to use learn about general semantics and how to use it to improve their communication or understandings?
I would say just about anybody can, including children. There are different levels of knowing it. The techniques themselves are very simple, although not necessarily easy to put into effect because we all have habits in how we use language and react. But the techniques, the methods themselves are very simple. I would say anybody can learn them. To the extent that you want to be able to
That's what the
teach
books-
it or understand the background, then that requires a little
Right.
bit more work
Right.
and study.
So
And
in
our
other
book
words-
is aimed toward
Yes. So your
people
book.
of all different levels.
Yes. So this is a book, and there are other books on the subject.
Many.
And there is the magazine,
Yes, et
et
cetera.
cetera, and there's the website. And you have a website about this book, if anyone had any questions about that.
That's
Yes.
right. Yes.
So we'll put that on the screen at the end with the credits.
Okay, thank you, because we have a lot of other things too, articles that we've written and links to related work.
Right. So that will be great. Well, I want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been
Thank
you.
great
It's been a
fun and
pleasure,
very
so
interesting.
quickly.
It was a great follow-up to the book because I'm plowing through the book by myself, and then I could.
Well, discussion groups are helpful, and we are going to get together with some people who were at the seminar here and start a kind of discussion.
We hope you have found this program intellectually stimulating and that you will continue to investigate the ideas raised here. To connect with other like-minded individuals, please contact any of the dozens of free thought organizations, such as the American Humanist Association, American Atheists, the Center for Inquiry, and Atheists United. You may also email the producer directly via leebaker27@gmail.com. This program has been distributed through the courtesy of Atheists United.